has been fulfilled.
What was my dream?
Your dream
Shobri,
of having a roaring ICS Google group.
Yes, no, this is happening. Yes.
Yes.
And a lot of the credit goes to Hemant.
Yeah,
It does.
Hemant's posts attract a lot of comments, And now I have persuaded him to do something which will write within next week, 10 days. And that will be a super hit. He's writing an analysis on, generally how social media and Chinese commentators are looking at border developments.
Hasn't Hemant joined yet?
Yeah, he's there.
Okay, now
Usha, you are also partly getting cut. I think you need to adjust your screen little bit. Yeah. Yeah, and come little bit more to center, Usha. Yeah, this is better. Yeah.
At this rate, Ashok, one would think you want everybody's portrait.
Yes, no.
Yeah, but Ashok again, dark.
I'm in dark any case, sir. I want to remain in dark.
Adjust your light.
Yeah.
Hi Manu, hi Ashok, hi Patricia.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Hello, how are you?
Hi.
I think some of us are regular, faithful participants.
Yeah. Even though we are not seen.
Well, we don't have to be seen always.
Yes. No.
And the Giri Dashankar Memorial Lecture, how many registrations so far?
I'll have to check with someone where.
We have advertised it quite.
Yeah, we advertised it quite a bit. Yeah. So
What time is it?
it's
6 o'clock.
6:30 on Monday.
6:30.
6:30, I think. Yeah.
6:30 baje. Acha, theek.
Because you have
Okay,
to look at the time zone.
Yeah, it will be 10:30 maybe there in the US. Yeah.
Yeah, it will be earlier than that. I think 9 o'clock or so.
Six,
9 o'clock.
9 o'clock actually.
9 o'clock, yeah.
9 o'clock East Coast.
Hello, Mary.
Oh, Mary has joined?
Hi.
Yes, I think so. Hi. No picture, but yeah, a bot instead.
No. 35 so far. Had it been Galwan Bhali or something, by now 100 people would have joined.
By the way, Ritu is in quarantine in a hotel.
In Delhi?
In Delhi, yeah. From where she can see
now,
JNU.
yeah.
They have arrived.
They've arrived about 6 days back, and then they chose a hotel from where they can see JNU.
Oh, they were missing JNU so much. No.
so some hotel in Vasant Kunj, I forgot the name. Oh, Ritu is there. Oh,
Yes,
Ritu
I'm
is there.
there.
Wow.
Oh, Ritu
Okay.
is there. Welcome
Oh,
back,
great,
Ritu.
We were gossiping about you. You overheard us.
EP, you must be feeling like this is a family seminar.
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Now I
We
can
will
see
be beginning the
myself.
seminar now.
You see everybody. Yes.
Yeah, that's nice. I think we've all
Nice.
been switched on.
So, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Good afternoon. So, we will be beginning the seminar now. We have already begun the YouTube streaming, and I will be muting all participants except for the chair, that is Patricia ma'am, and the speakers. So I'll be doing that now, and please feel free to begin.
Now, Govind, has Govind disappeared?
Yes, I'm having little bit of problem. Just joining.
With the, no, you should be right now.
Just a second. Just a second.
We can start now, Patricia.
Okay. Well, we're just waiting for Govind.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Well, a couple of minutes.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can't see you yet, Govind. Maybe we can. No, just darkness. Oh, there we are. You're there?
Yeah.
Yes. Right. Now we can see you. Can you see the other
Yeah.
participant?
I can see all life size of you.
Right. She's been swapped for a Tulsi plant.
Mm. Hi, Ping.
Hi.
Mm. And Usha is.
Usha's here. She's come back.
All right.
So I think we might start with everyone's permission.
Yes, ma'am. Please begin.
Is that okay?
Yes, ma'am. Please begin.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, I don't need to announce that this is a very welcome seminar on something rather different to what has been occupying us for many, many weeks now, formerly titled The Gender System and Women's Agency in China in the context of COVID-19. Now we have three very distinguished speakers who will kick off with presentations of about 8 minutes each. First, Govind Kelkar. Hi, Govind. We've already, most of us said hello. And she's taking a wide view of efforts at improving gender equality and women's agency in China, progress and challenges. And then we have a very, very special visitor or in our midst. So pleased to welcome you here, Ms. Tsai Ping, who's speaking specifically on the topic of gender impact of COVID-19 in China. And Usha Chandan from JNU, who is speaking on gender during the COVID era, comparing India and China. There are some ground rules which most people here are aware of. The speakers will have about 8 minutes each, but time to return in response to questions. The speakers only will be unmuted or on microphone, and all the panelists will be muted until called on to ask questions. For asking questions, you can use the raise hand option available at the bottom of the participants list or in the drop-down menu, and or questions can be sent in the chat form. And I'll call on participants to ask their questions then, and the participant asking questions should unmute himself or herself, and other participants should stay muted until called upon. I think they're the basic ground rules. Let me know if I've forgotten anything here. Now, we regard this, I don't think I need to further introduce the speakers because the blurb for the seminar has introduced them all, and I'm in danger of running out of voice, which would be very alarming. Anyhow, let's see how far we get. Govind Kelkar, Professor and Executive Director of the Gen Dev Center for Research and Innovation in India, and visiting professor of the Council for Social Development in Delhi. She's also associated with the Asian Institute of Technology in Bangkok, where she taught and researched for quite a number of years, and also edited and promoted or initiated a journal which many of you will be familiar with, Gender, Technology and Development, which was published at one stage by Sage and now by Routledge. She is also associated with the Institute of Chinese Studies. Now, Professor Tsai is a leading Chinese feminist, an executive committee member of the Development Alternatives with Women for a New Era, appropriately entitled, the acronym is DAWN, and particularly leads the initiative on Dawn's sexual and reproductive health and rights activities. She has been very active in this world since 1995, since the Fourth World Conference for Women in Beijing, and has had deep experience of working with government agencies, NGOs, and so on. Her interests are particularly relevant to the present debate, including media and communications, gender-based violence, sexual and reproductive health, and so on. She's speaking to us from Beijing. Very welcome indeed. And finally, Dr. Usha Chandran, who teaches language in JNU. Her work is mainly in the field of language, literature, and then has branched out to culture, politics, many other themes, and she's contributed a very important, along with others, of course, very importantly to the gender interest in ICS work, including in an essay on the 19th Party Congress and so on. Welcome to the three speakers. They will be speaking in the order that I've just given. Now, the theme, of course, links gender, women's agency, and COVID-19. Going backwards, we should say that COVID-19, the coronavirus pandemic, is a global phenomenon, and it is certainly likely to be one of the defining features of our times. It's been likened to many of the major pandemics of human history, from the Black Death to the plague, to the influenza epidemic in 1918, to Ebola, SARS, and so on. But it may also be regarded as what sociologists now like to call one of the critical events which shape human history and human society, in this case, globally. It perhaps overtakes the two world wars of the last century. Now, in ICS, as everyone will have, we've been exchanging views, we have had a lot of address to COVID-19. Some of it is actually, in COVID-19 has been a sort of key term leading to geopolitical questions. India-China relations, China and the world, China and the US, the new balance of power, and so on. It's also been linked, we've had several discussions on economic aspects of COVID-19, but these have been particularly at the macroeconomic and financial, in the financial domains, and in the context of international trade. Here we also must look at the economic aspects of, in terms, with reference to the gender questions, and I'm sure that will occupy many of our speakers here. That is, questions of employment, women's workforce participation, access to assets, and many other such questions. Now, what hasn't been mentioned in many of our discussions are the social implications of the discussion of COVID. And this seminar is providing exactly that forum, with particular reference, I should think, to family relations, to marital relations of one sort and another. And then we have the cultural dimensions. These have been much discussed in the context of particularly Hemant Adlaker's work on the Fang Fang phenomenon, and coming through also some of the work done by creative writers as people who express in their own way the dilemmas of our times. We must also not forget the important demographic aspects of gender relations and of gender relations in times of a pandemic or a major global crisis. Here we might be looking at everything from famine, hunger, survival, and of course, the medical system. So the demography of this is something in which the gender flag should always be raised. And we have here, of course, Dr. Bidyut Mohanty, who has actually done her PhD work originally on the gender aspects of famine in India. Perhaps she can come in the comparative discussion later. So altogether, there are a lot of things to be covered, but the speakers have, in their own way, outlined what they're going to do. Govind is going to give us the wide brushstrokes at efforts of improving gender equality and women's agency, the progress and challenges. As I said, is Yinping, gender impact of COVID-19 in China, and Usha on the comparative aspect. I hope that people will, there's going to be a lot of crossing conversations here, and look forward to the discussion. Now, there will be, the speakers will have a chance to respond to questions and give their answers after the questions are asked, and then we'll have concluding remarks. Thank you very much, and let's begin with Govind. Govind.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Ambassador Kant, Professor Mohanty, Bidyut Mohanty, and many friends. And thank you so much, Yiping. Last night, she wrote to me that she had not received the mails, and it was almost midnight for her. So I wrote to her saying that this is on, and somehow the mail did not reach. And then I used another email and sent it. So thanks especially, Yiping, for your last minute kind of thing. That is, I didn't realize that it was not reaching you, or probably it was Gmail. I would, as Patricia, you have given a very good background. Thank you so much. The reason I thought of using this broad brush, not only because I work on this area, but I thought it would be really China and the pandemic area in particular now is known for two things. There has been increased poverty globally, also in China, and also increased inequalities. And now we are dealing with this question kind of thing, why the efforts at inequalities, and particularly gender inequalities, where 50% of the population is involved, whether any effort was made in the socialist reconstruction of China or not. And if it was made, why, where was the problem? That was the kind of, so these are the two questions that I wanted to put it as a background and then come to the COVID-19 situation. So one question is really that what efforts have been made to end the gender-based inequalities which China was known for having in the pre-revolutionary phase, and through policy changes and legal measures. These were the only two take very briefly. And why these inequalities persisted in the revolutionary phase and in the post kind of socialist construction of China. So that has been bothering me. And then I looked at the laws, and there are two kinds of laws that have been passed in order to deal with the in general the inequalities and gender inequalities or women's inequalities in particular. And what were the problems with those? Land reform law of 1950s and the marriage law of 1950s, soon after the liberation period. And the marriage law was superseded in 1980, amended in 2001, really dealing with the question of women's rights, women's equality and violence against women, particularly domestic violence against women. The land reform law, which is of particular interest, gave the kind of special rights to women of equality, the productive resources. But throughout this period, if we look at the span of the period of 1970 years, we find that two things have happened. One is that there is a development of women's agency. Women are able to resist, women are able to demand for their rights. And there were many plays and operas and songs where women expressed their, asserted their rights. For example, one song which was very popular, kind of opera in 1949-50s, which says, "Your place is by the stove. I forbid you to touch my land." That's what the man said. So this is the land particularly interests me. And she says, but my name is in the title deed too. You are equal now. You must give me my due. Or shall we ask the court to decide, and nobody heeds your old rules today? So old rules, traditional rules, which even kind of miserable conditions that women were not even given rules and no rights were there, they were replaced by kind of definite kind of laws, and these were the two instruments. Second period that I find the landmark in terms of the major, the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. And we are all familiar with these periods, and that's why I'm not going into those periods, and I can take them in greater detail, where the women's rights were given special importance in terms of what we are now particularly focusing on, care work, and domestic work, which was in the 1958 and Great Leap Forward. And in the Cultural Revolution, there was a rapid progress with regard to the improvement in women's agency. The sexual division of labor was questioned. The care work was questioned by women. This was not seen as there was, of course, a campaign that men should, the campaign which was known as the Criticizing Confucius and Lin Biao in 1970s, where it was also said that women's household work, which is regarded and not work, it is not entire women's responsibility. And promotion of the matrilocal marriages. So these were the true, because patrilocality was supposed to be causing the problem with regard to the gender system or gender relations. These laws were repeatedly tightened. And in the 2003 and 2005 in land laws, land contracting laws, the giving the women, stipulating that women and men should have equal rights in the contracted land, that is the household responsibility system, was introduced. And in 2015, then a Chinese passed a law, Chinese government, Anti-Domestic Violence Act. That was, it is a bit late in 2015, because all this period, All China Women's Federation have reported that violence against women have continued at least 30%. Whatever the micro studies came, they reported that. The question was, why this domestic violence? What has happened? Or in the other forms of violence? What were the policy changes, and what were those drivers that made kind of these policy changes repeatedly? And in order to, I find really four major drivers of this policy change, which are both internal and external. One is the women's participation in the resistance movement, in mass movement. For example, in the land reform movement, reported cases are that 70 to 80% in the land reform movement were women. These were the Central Committee's document, and J. Fang Rebao talks about them. Second was the global recognition of women's economic property rights and Declaration of the Human Rights, and CEDAW, and most important, Beijing Conference, 1995, which is a landmark. And we are still really talking about the Beijing Platform Action, which was to be held this year. And then because of the COVID-19, we could not have the 25 years of the Beijing Plus Action. civil society's engagement with the state. I was pleasantly surprised that how the civil society, not only All China Women's Federation, but how much civil society groups have been engaged in terms of the protest and in terms of the demand of their rights and making out the reality for that. And there have been very important things which we can take about this. And some men were also involved recently. So, but what was the problem with these? Problem was actually women's equality, except in the beginning, was never addressed. What they addressed were the two things. That's why I call them the flawed policies. And these were one was really that women's participation in economic activities, which is very much important. But wage disparity, kind of women-specific work point continued, women-specific duties were considered. So women's agency was increased, but women's gender equality or women's empowerment, in my understanding, was not there. So that is one thing. It was also said really in 1960s or 70s that men should be socially based and women should be family oriented. And this came in the 2015 Act interpretation also. So when these laws were passed, interpreted, or people understood, they were totally kind of boundary driven. The outsider boundary of inside boundary for women, that domestic responsibilities is their work, and outside work is men's work, and then that's why they have the right. There was also a lot of relevant, another fourth driver was relevance of feminist research. And beginning from the May 4th movement, which we tend to forget in the COVID, that how really feminism and feminist links were there in the May 4th movement in 1919 and that period. But how those things were questioned, and women and men were both engaged, and a lot of academics and non-academic debates were there. So question is, if these are the two areas, then whether when we come to the COVID period, first thing, we are not really surprised that violence, domestic violence is there, has continued. But what we are surprised by, that despite these 70 years and despite government changes, and Chinese government is known very kind of in terms of centralized or decentralized efforts in implementing the laws, these laws, women specific laws, were not implemented. And that is evident in the very much COVID period. So the two areas that are resistance to transformative change in gender systems in China and in Asia in general, one is the gender division of housework has not changed. It may be changed in urban areas, but by and large, it has remained women's duties, despite the fact that they are supposed to be participating in economic activities, and they are very much engaged in economic activities, we know by employment figures. Second is, there is a general reluctance to recognize women's unmediated authority and control of property and productive assets, whether control, whether ownership rights, but there is a general reluctance. They are seen within the household. And these are the two problems that has caused women's inequality and women's limitation on the gender equality, despite the Beijing conference, which has been a landmark in the history of world conferences on women. When we come to the COVID period, I think I'm...
Yes, Govind,
yeah, just 1 minute. There have been some important plays. I don't want to present that Chinese women have not young and old and not so young. They have not really reacted to this. They have been questioning these, and it is not some outsiders like us to be talking about. We have learned only from them that some progressive representation of women in this period, for example, in 2017, 2018, 2020, a number of plays and kind of cell phone games have come. They Love the Producer, and another TV play was, what was I'm forgetting? I Love the Producer, and one was the Lady's Character. Okay. And they have been questioning these things, but they were widely criticized that they are for their derogatory depiction of women. So when you talk of the rights, when you talk to even sexual rights, then it becomes the kind of derogatory credentials. So sorry. So these producers did not call themselves as feminist by and large, except in the classrooms, and people like or women like international expert coming from the academic background like Yiping and others. Generally, these women would not call themselves feminist, but they will be essentially talking in the COVID period, women's rights and gender subjectivities within the institution of marriage and outside the institution of marriage. So this is where we find that this is going on in the COVID period. And this is the root cause of the increased domestic violence, which is about 25 to 30% increase in China in the COVID period. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's introduced, taken it right up to date at record speed. And I think thrown the ball very much into Yiping's court, if I may call you by your first and given name. So would you like to then elaborate on some of this, Yiping?
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to express my, felt a great, gratitude to this opportunity to have a discussion with the colleagues from India. And thank you so much. When you have really laid a very solid ground, gave an overall picture and also reflection on the status quo of gender equality and women's rights in China, on which I can build on, my further elaboration on the subject and how this can relate it to the current situation. I think my overall the subject would be really focused on how this COVID-19 would possibly change, the scenario of the gender equality and women's rights, and also provide maybe pose a new challenge, and also might provide new opportunities for the gender advocacy in China. So this is a topic I want to elaborate in my 7 minutes. First of all, I think there's lately I read this article that's an online survey conducted by Women's Study Institute of China on the opinion of the public opinion on the role of women in combating COVID-19. And according to this survey, the women's contribution in combating the COVID-19 pandemic has been recognized by all the social groups and across all generations, which is very encouraging because they're not only recognize the role of the medical, the service providers, the health workers, the doctors and nurses. They also recognize the role of women that contribute to this, combating this like a national campaign. It's the community, the women that working as the volunteers or working as the community workers. Those the roles were not usually so visible for many people. And the third one is the recognition of the women's role in the family because of the lockdown, because of the social distancing, because of the people have to adjust to a new way of life, which spend much more time within the family than before. So the women's, their role in family has been recognized. Oh, for many, especially the men, the young people, and they said, oh, I never thought about, the women had to cook 3 meals and they take so much time and energy and the creativity. It's really, without loving to your family, I can't imagine this can be done because now you can't go out for dine, right? You can't dine out in the restaurant, so you have to eat so this is the kind of, the care work, the house chore that, women performed for a longest time but without pay, without recognition. And now I think they become visible. And also other works that women has been done. For example, the women working in the cleaning, which very low paid, very low social esteemed, kind of job, and the garbage collecting, the food supplies, and other kind of care work. This all, had been like, for example, because of the lockdown, many domestic workers has to, stop their work because can't now go to other family. Now the people realize how much, how important their work meant to their life. So this kind of, recognition, I think, give a good positive, and there's always, the silver lining in the clouds. So this is maybe something that we can, celebrate. However, there's also, I think, the gender stereotypes that has, potentially being reinforced during this COVID-19. One is about, the house, as I said, the house workers' contribution has been recognized. However, there's also kind of gender stereotyping about their role. The famous, the photos that taken about, the nurses and doctors, women nurses and doctors were shaved their hair before they go to Wuhan. The men didn't, was not required to shave their head, but women does, because they consider, if you have long hair, and it's very difficult to wear, this protection, the kind of equipment, and also you need to take time. But I think symbolically, it's also the way that, trying to defeminize in rather than, recognize, the women's contribution, but trying to defeminize, the women's kind of characteristics, because that's symbolic of weakness. And feminine it means weakness. It's the long hair. They will actually having a long hair for women nurses and doctors will hurdle your performance, your job performance. That kind of thinking actually was behind of this kind of performance. But of course, that photo was presented as a good case, as how dedicated those women are, but actually is the reinforcement of the gender stereotyping. And also, I think the stereotype would reflected in how the women's contribution was highlighted and enshrined. On the other hand, their needs were not really give enough attention. For example, those personal protection equipment was not really designed for women's body, so they have to wear oversized, very inconvenient kind of the gears when they perform their job. So this is like the lack of gender perspectives is also a big problem. And it's also interesting, you look at how the gender roles has been, reshaped and kind of disturbed. For example, during the lockdown, because there's only one family member is allowed to go out for doing grocery, like every 2-3 days, and men become very eager to do this kind of job, to go grocery, which is not their usually, kind of task. But there was a lot of, joke about, they coming back and to see, oh, I do not know what's different between this type of pepper, from that. It always, was criticized by their wives and female family members because they always buy the wrong stuff. There's something that they didn't pick the good vegetables and or the right fruits, etc. So this is, how this, the gender role has also kind of, disturbed a little bit. There was a lot of discussion and research on the violence against women issues, which I would not go in deep. I just want to say in the last 2 minutes about, how the other aspects of the, the gender impact of the COVID-19 need to be tackled. One is about, you already, in the introduction, you already addressed this issue about employment, the job lost. I think both China and India has experienced like a slightly, I don't know what's the, the pace in India, but in China, women's labor participation in job market has been among the, the top in the world. However, it is also the slightly, decrease in the past 5-10 years. And, given this, the job loss, in the massive job loss due to the COVID, we can see those jobs that many of the jobs that women concentrated are affected, like, the labor-intensive job. There's a domestic kind of, domestic job, and among others. So lastly, I want to, raise this question. That's what we can do. How the Chinese feminists or advocates address those issues. I think one is that I think there are two approaches that we need to apply to trying to retain what the gains of women's rights, gender equality that we achieved in the over last 70 years. Then meanwhile, we're also trying to control the damage to make sure that's no turning back. One is, I think the advocacy was, as I mentioned, it's two approach. One is how we can re-emphasize and assure the protection of women's rights and the state obligation and responsibility in this, the rulemaking, the policies, gender responsive policies and laws. And the second one is how we, how we can reassure the women's agency being taken into consideration, so that women are not like only the vulnerable groups and need to be protected, but also recognize there's also the contributors and their agencies, and provide the enabling environment so that the agencies can maximize. I just want to give one last words about why I'm saying that, because in the last months there was a law that China has passed the first the civil code, which in the article regard the divorce is for the first time they have required 30 days calm down. So when you apply for divorce in the past, you can immediately there's enact, but now you have to take another month, so that you will not make sure that you make the decision not out of your insane kind of mentality. So this kind of but this kind of laws, some people criticize as patriarchal kind of protectionism method, rather than thinking women with agency and have their own decision, can make their own decision. So this kind of something that we should be careful and vigilant in our advocacy. I'll end here. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That was a very a very well elaborated set of questions that you've now thrown to the next speaker. So Usha, would you come in and make sure that you stick within 10 minutes, please?
Yeah, actually, a lot of the things that I was going to say has been said, so I'll just focus more on the comparative part. So as we've seen that, any kind of crisis, whether it's a financial crisis, natural calamity, pandemic, or lockdown, women are disproportionately impacted. So therefore, in this study, I just looked at how the pandemic and lockdown has affected women in particular, comparing both India and China. And for that, I looked at 3 dimensions, that is gender participation, gender impact, and gender stereotypes, a lot of which has been said. But I'll focus on the comparative part. So women working at the front line, as already mentioned, is a trying challenge, especially for the nurses. I'm focusing on the nurses because actually, if we look at China, it's they have 1.85 nurses every 1,000 people. That is the proportion of the population. And in India, it is 1.7 to every 1,000. And 98% of the nurses in China are actually women. And in India, it is 83.4% of the nurses are women. And interestingly, in China, doctors comprise more than 50% of the doctors of the community health physicians are actually women. And 30 to 50% of the doctors in different provinces, they have different figures, are women. In India, only 16.8% of the doctors are women. So, and then there's this often overlooked sanitation workers who are in China, they comprise more than 50%. And in India, they are nearly 50%. So the role of all these individuals like nurses, doctors, and sanitation workers in the fight against COVID has been very important. So they are under intense pressure, and the lack of the protective gear has actually taken a physical and mental toll on the medical staff. So there are several reports, and Yiping also mentioned about the nurses and the poor working conditions, the long working hours with no breaks and no supply of gender-specific needs. Like Yiping just mentioned about one nurse. Actually, there was this huge outcry in China when one nurse was complaining in the social media when she had taken a small video clipping and it went viral that she does not have a sanitary napkin because the senior medical supervisors were not actually sanctioning these, saying that they are not important medical use. They are not of important medical use. So then it took about many volunteers to actually have donated a lot of adult diapers. So there are nurses and doctors who are actually wearing adult diapers to avoid the short visits to the washrooms and during menstruation. So, and in India, the situation is even worse because of the heat, they're prohibiting the use of air-conditioned fan and coolers. So the people are working under extreme condition of heat, and the nurses have been complaining that the doctors are always preferred when it comes to providing PPE and other facilities, like especially lodging. Some of the nurses are not given any lodging facility; they're asked to go back home. And coming to China, then as of 14th of February, there are 1,760 healthcare workers who were infected and 6 of them died. In India, the Indian government has been tight-lipped about it, but the Indian Journal of Medical Research claimed on 23rd of May, 1,073 healthcare professionals have been tested positive. Looking at the government, what the government has done in China is the 10th of February, they actually issued the State Council issued a statement, an instruction as to how to solve the problems faced by the healthcare workers, especially how to go about solving the issues of food and lodging, and also compulsory testing and quarantine for the healthcare workers. Whereas the Indian government has actually on 15th of May put an end to the mandatory testing and quarantine facility for the healthcare workers. In fact, on 13th of April, the Ministry of Health and Welfare came out with a guideline naming the problems that the healthcare workers are facing, but they did not name anyone as to who will solve these problems. They did not give any instruction or guideline as to how these issues will be solved. What is more shocking is that the Union Health Ministry actually came out with an affidavit to the Apex Court saying that, and I quote, that even though it is a responsibility of the hospital to implement the prevention and control of the epidemic, however, the final responsibility to protect themselves from COVID-19 lies in the hands of the healthcare workers themselves. So clearly washing their hands off any responsibility. However, on 22nd April, the government of India came out with the ordinance to punish those who are attacking the healthcare workers. So we have, with all of these, we come out with the inference that there's a shortage of healthcare workers, and women comprise majority of these healthcare workers. Low wages, poor food and lodging facilities, poor or negligible healthcare security has actually heightened during the COVID-19, during the struggle against COVID-19. Now, coming to the second aspect, which is gendered impact of virus and the lockdown. There's an increasing fear of contracting the virus amongst the general public. We all know that. However, the mothers, the expecting mothers and the mothers of of infants have more reasons to panic, because it has been the pregnant women have increased heart rate and they have more load on the heart, and the lung capacity is diminished. Therefore, there's a growing chance that or they're more vulnerable to extracting the virus. So in China, the New York Times report says that the pandemic killed 2,600 pregnant women. And due to the lockdown, the pre and postnatal facilities have been closed. Maternity nurses and doctors have been pulled out and shipped to the crisis centers. So mothers and infants are also missing out on immunizations. The same case in India. However, there's no report on how many pregnant women the pandemic has killed in India, but there are heartbreaking reports on how many of them are dying because they're being denied admission even for delivery, even in both government and private hospitals. And the similar situation of prenatal, postnatal service being stopped. The rural India are facing even a larger problem, because the existing care centers are so far that they cannot travel because of the lockdown. Now, as regards the other impact of the virus, we have to wait and watch. But the impact of the lockdown on informal sector, like Yiping and Dr. Kelkar just mentioned, that it's been the most hit sector, the informal sector. And in China, the proportion of women in the formal sector is coming down, and they are disproportionately centered around the casual employment. So more than 50% of casual employment or informal sector employers are actually women. In India, 94% of the employed women are actually employed in unorganized sector. So 62% of the urban informal workers are actually women. And with the crisis in the market closure, there's no order, no contract. The families are suffering. They have the only source of income has been stopped. So they are resorting to negative coping, distress of sale, money lending from informal landowners, and other such issues. And women are actually shouldering also the household work, like just mentioned. However, they're also going through abuse, like Dr. Kelkar just mentioned, the increasing, frequency of domestic violence. So for many women and children, home is not a safe place to be. Perhaps going out of the house serves as a breather for them. But confined in their new realities amid lockdown has become a nightmare for many women and children, especially girls. There's been sexual abuse. Now, in China and India, both India and China, the reports of surge of serious acts of violence. And in China, they say that the increase has been 3 times more than the pre-lockdown time. In India, the report says that first month it doubled and then went down and then went up again. So experts believe that the reason is that the victims are actually scared of provoking the violator, and the phones and other ways to complain are actually snatched away. And as men's frustration of joblessness and non-availability of alcohol and heightened state of anxiety due to being confined to the house and the extent of violence also increases. So on 3rd of March, the government of China implemented the national policy on gender equality, wherein they mentioned all gender inequalities. They mentioned all the kinds of inequalities that are there, and including domestic violence, and also instructed the provincial ACWF to take up the matter. However, in India, the Minister for Women and Child Welfare, Child Development, Smriti Irani, denied that there is an increase in domestic violence. In spite of the fact that the National Commission for Women official figures say that there's a surge of complaints on crime against women, and the surge is 94%. Out of them, 61.7% is regarding domestic violence. So violence inflicted on wives during, violence during this lockdown, including marital rape, and on children, including sexual abuse, to let out anger and depression amongst men, has become common during the lockdown. Moreover, the statement and the way it has been solved by just counseling, it seems that everything is such acts of violence, which is otherwise seen as heinous acts of violence, is actually normalized. Public spaces are not safe anymore during the lockdown, and even after the partial opening up, we don't know how safe it would be, because once common spaces are not common anymore. So the last part wherein I'm bringing the gender stereotyping.
Yes, I would like you to finish up so we can have some questions. Yes.
Yeah, this is my conclusion. So in the fight against, so in the fight against COVID-19, we have seen that in the frontline workers, the role of women in the frontline workers has been extremely important. Like Yiping also mentioned that it has been recognized. However, what is happening is that the nursing profession is actually seen as synonym to women in the minds of the people universally, carrying a gender connotation of addressing a woman. So even though men are coming, but interestingly in Mumbai, they have been the male nurses are being referred to as brothers, so that their gender is not confused upon. So this gendered traditional mindset of women carrying motherly love, and therefore they are better caregivers, and men are more intelligent, and therefore they are better healers. It works out very well in the medical profession. Now, owing to the fact that nursing profession has extremely low in socioeconomic status and social respectability, it is low paid, so men do not venture into this field. However, it is noteworthy that in the fight against COVID, it's not a wider topic of debate that whether in China or in India, that the proportion of female caregivers who are risking their lives and also saving lives, and who are actually unprotected, stigmatized, and unappreciated soldiers, if we were to like to call it, because everyone is worried about the soldiers at the border. So basically they are the ones who are working in the front line, and they're more than male. It is not a debate. They're normally considered as a weaker sex. However, they are performing performing the job of a nurse is actually naturalized. And another thing is that lockdown has led to the reiteration and reinforcement of gender stereotyping, as just mentioned. However, I would like to especially mention over here that we are increasingly, witnessing these loads of memes and videos and cartoons of wife bashing running around in social media, both in India and China. It is universally understood that the household chores should be done by women themselves, or only women. Therefore, any man doing it is because the wife is forcing him to do, and therefore that becomes the element of humor that the wife is torturing. And therefore, again, and all these gender stereotyping, including the fact that men have to brave out to buy the groceries.
Usha, yes, Usha, yes, thank you very much. We were getting quite carried away. We've let so many hairs loose. So I'm just wondering, I can't see any hands up.
I have raised my hand. This is Nupur Ray.
Please introduce yourself.
I'm Nupur Ray, and
Okay.
I'm at Department of Political Science, Kamala Nehru College.
Right.
And so I have a couple of comments to make, which Dr. Chandran or Professor Yiping can take up. One is looking at the very narrative of pandemic itself, and the narrative in the language in which the state and its agencies have portrayed, especially in India, which is a hyper masculinized language. So all of us suddenly have become warriors, and the language that is essentially being used of is that of a war, and where I believe that it is actually a governance issue. So therefore, a lot of normalization in terms of vigilantism, normalizing of surveillance, normalizing of perhaps heckling of bodies, association of bodies with diseases. So therefore, the larger narrative of the language of pandemic in India, especially being used in a very masculinist and a very hyper patriarchal sense. The other, and which is also Dr. Yeping mentioned in terms of patriarchal protectionism. So women in constant need of being protected. The other is basically derived from the first point, which is that a lot of language when being used of women in terms of having access to basic resources and healthcare, and also special facilities during this pandemic, is one of benevolence and charity. I do not see language in terms of accessing these rights as citizens of the state. It is always as if the police also there was a video which went viral where it went in the colonies of, and saying that how men of the family should help women, doing the household chores, as if helping women would be some kind of benevolence. And so is the language of the state in terms of providing access to some very basic resources which should have been entitled to them as citizens.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we take another question? Any other hands up? I can't see them. Anyone else got their hands up? Yes.
Nair has asked something.
That's Vidyut.
Okay, Vidyut. Why didn't you come here at this point?
Okay.
then we'll ask the speakers to respond. Thank you, Nupur. That was a very interesting intervention, double intervention.
You know, I have a question to Professor Yifing, if I have spelled it. Professor Chai. Now you tell us that this women kind of work is sought after, including the informal sector. Now we know that the domestic work is never valued, nor does it get reflected in the GDP. Now that the COVID has provided a situation, an opportunity, well, in a wrong sense, do you think they'll value this kind of work, women's work, in future? Thank you.
Okay, at this point we have a double pair of questions from Nupur, which any of these speakers might like to respond to, and a specific question for Tsai, that is the from Bidyut just now. So first of all, who would come in and like to come in response to
I'll start for the hypermasculinity.
Yes, go on.
Yeah, so it's basically the hypermasculine language is used especially by the media to project the women's contribution as something which should be appreciated and which should be seen in the light of this whole warlike situation, so that they are pushed forward. And whereas what is interesting is that, I don't know, I couldn't mention that there were reports talking about 9-month-old pregnant women in Wuhan and in Karnataka, interestingly, and eulogizing them and saying that, and I quote, the shining example of selfless dedication to work. So such references in media is bringing out the fact that, even though in a way that somebody would think that no, their contribution has been appreciated and all, but on the other hand, their needs and their gender-specific requirements, and especially the very extremely poor lodging and food facility, and the fact that they are putting their families under danger, all of these things do not get as much media attention as it should, because there is this idea of going and fighting the war and doing the great thing. So that is
right. Now, if I might, the question came from a perspective located in India. So let's ask Professor Tsai Yinping to, would you say that the language in China is one that is hyper-masculinized and therefore giving a message to women as well?
I think here we see the commonality of the type of language that used to describe the whole, the COVID situation. I'm not surprised, why this kind of language being used in a particular time on this particular case. I think one is those very hyper, masculine and also, militarized language was applied because of, I think, the urgency that this message trying to send, and also this the massive the mobilization that need to be conducted to mobilize resources, people, and also trying to give people some kind of inspiration. So this kind of language was, always, play that kind of function. When you're trying to emphasize the urgency, then you use, the enemies, approaching, they're killing our mother, the motherland, and killing our people. If you, listen to the, national anthem, it's all this kind of theme, full of this kind of language. I think it's, this is why I think this kind of language is kind of like a, like become a formulation whenever there's a urgency, the urgent, the urgency that need to be addressed in the, large scale, and it's, mass mobilization are needed. However, this language has no place for women. I can't see any. Women are always a secondary. They apply. Their role is more like supporting. But this time, however, it's changed because now man is not the soldier that's carrying the weapon to go to the front line to fight the enemy. It's the women. This is the women nurses and doctors and house workers. This is the women to collect the garbage and clean up, the hospitals. So those women. So there is no new language that hasn't been invented to describe. But now we see the different gender of soldier in this battle. So this is something I think will be very interesting if you can, elaborate it in your research in the future.
Well, thank you very much. Govind, did you want to come in or shall we move on?
No, I wanted to say that, hyper-masculine language, not only language is also part of action. There has been action also in terms of the hyper-masculinity. It never died, in fact, but in the emergency situations like COVID or otherwise also, that hyper-masculinity is kind of, in terms of action, in terms of language, both become very evident. Whatever the case you see of domestic violence, and that's why domestic violence and other violence is very necessary to see, that complete defacing of the women, that you cannot raise your voice. I had the 3 case studies in mind about domestic violence. One was beaten up, in case of badly beaten up, in case of that she cooked and there was a kind of more salt, lot of salt, in fact. She must have put double kind of thing. In another case, the child was crying. And third case was that the house was not really properly arranged, it was dirty. Now looking at this kind of thing, the language and action tends to combine. And this is also people, outright people are saying that the nurturing home has become the home of or the sphere of anxiety and fear, where women really do not want to remain as much. Or as the saying goes in Haryana, Haryana state is known for by beating, that women would prefer to marry a person who is in military. Why? Because they say that you get married, but you face your husband only for a limited period when he comes back on the for leave. Otherwise, it is you control the household on your own. So total control really leads to hyper masculine action, and also the use of the language in order to keep the women where they are.
Okay, well, we have.
Can I add one more point to this question, if I may?
Yes.
I think I just want to add one more point on this topic. And this kind of masculine language and the wartime language can be manipulated to justify the violation of people's basic rights, to justify the militarized and the control over the people, and the civilians, etc. So this is something really worrisome. However, I think this is also an opportunity for us to rewrite the manuscript, and to reinvent the language. For example, now you don't need to carry a weapon to kill anybody to show your patriot and your love to your nation and soldier. You just need to stay home. Stay home, take care of your family. So that's kind of, to build the relationship with your neighbors, with the people around you. So this is the way that you show your passion, you show your love, you show your love to your nation and your people. So this kind of, this is sometimes I think the feminist perspective really can contribute to rewrite this manuscript, the language.
I see that there are several hands up and a couple of comments, and time is running short. So let me ask Pravir Chakravarti if he would like to come in.
Thank you, ma'am. My
Yes.
question is to Usha, And the question is, firstly, Usha, I'm really amazed to hear that I'm an army man. So that means my wife must be very lucky because we keep getting posted to operational areas. And my children also very rarely saw me. So I think ladies must be very happy. This is the first time I'm hearing that ladies want to marry army men. It's a music to my ears. But normally we in the army find it very difficult to get a lady to be our wife. It's a very tough task. Well, Usha, I must say a lady carried her father all the way from Gurgaon, where I stay, right up to Darbhanga, on a cycle. And what I was amazed, second part which I am coming, the lockdown was over. The government said that maids can come and work. I find that, believe me or not, most of the people who have got COVID are those who are lower class. Okay? And if you go to very few people in the lower class are having this COVID problem. So why is it that in particularly, I'll say all over India, many families, the ladies are not being permitted by their husbands to employ the maids, saying that they come from areas which have got possibly unhygienic housing. And as a result, we have created a new caste system where we are not allowing maids to enter the houses. Now, I would like you to please carried out a lot of research, so you'd be able to tell me this.
Okay, let's take another question. There's someone here identified only by the code 247C63EO. Who is that who's put their hand up? Anyone owning up to that strange acronym? Okay, Manjushri, could you come in, please, followed by Vijay Nambia.
Yeah, good afternoon to all. I'm Manjushri, and I'm talking from Gurgaon, and I work in an NGO as a program manager. And I'm thankful to Usha ma'am and everyone who said many things about gender. And recently, I'm talking something about the ground situation here in Gurgaon. That due to COVID and due to this recurring lockdown, women are having disproportionate imposition of many restrictions. And especially the household help, the domestic maids, they are really facing the brunt of this lockdown. And recently RWA, the Residents Welfare Association, has put a regulation that the domestic help cannot access the residents of those who are in the containment zone, and the maid who are coming from the containment zone also cannot enter those areas. So in this situation, only possibility is that they can stay in the where they do work. So I am wondering that in this situation, when they are going to stay at their employer's household, then it will going to restrict their freedom of work. Maybe they may face the harassment. I mean, lots of regulation, and what would be their condition? It is beyond our imagination. It is the new things going to be experienced.
Manjushri, we must keep our comments very short because we have little time. I think the speakers have all understood what you're saying without the full story. And let's pass on to Vijay Nambia before we...
Thank you, Patricia.
Yes, hello, Vijay.
Just a very quick question. This, as a result of COVID, there's been a lot of emphasis on working at home. How has working at home affected the two genders, respectively, in China and India? Is there any stereotype, any generalization, any kind of? Because I've noticed in some cases, men tend to want to go back to the workplace faster than women would. Or is there any kind of this kind of generalization, and how does it affect agency?
Okay, now I'll put these series of questions to the speakers. Please just have, if at all, one sentence or two sentence responses.
So, can I start?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So, if I mean about the army officer part, I don't know. I mean, because that was just a case that she said that because of the domestic violence, and my father was also in the army, so I don't have anything against army.
I owe it. I owe it. You can say that. I said that.
Yeah, yeah. So, and that is true, because so that, you know, so that they can stay be away. It's because of the violence that they have to avoid. Then, but yeah, the maid part again. You said that the husbands are not permitting the wives to bring in the maids. So that's very interesting because I thought that mostly it is, I don't know who has the agency to decide whether the maid should come back home, and it actually depends from family to family. But the fact that it's a universal. I mean, it's sometimes very strange for me that the husband should allow the wife to get to bring in the maid or not. However, it could be a family discussion that whether they can take this risk, and whether the maid is coming from a danger zone, and whether I think it just depends on personal choice. And of course, Manjushri's question is very important. What is going to happen to these maids, because they are without jobs, and people are not going to give them salaries for, you know, more than 1 or 2 months without work. So that is, I mean, they are, as I said, these families are resorting to negative coping, wherein they are taking selling off their family assets, or taking money from informal money lenders. And sometimes they also tend to go to, they resort to child labor, because and other kinds of negative coping, which I'm not sure. We have to do a lot of research on that. And yes, women working from home, the equation is
women
definitely
and men working from home. Yes.
Yes, the equation is definitely affected, and it is understood, as I said, that it is the household chores has to be done by women, the main responsibility. Earlier, perhaps the men would just pitch in, help sometimes, but in today's date, the helping or the little bit of contribution is not enough, because everyone is at home practically all the time. So the work is also increased, and women's official work, that is work from home official work, has definitely perhaps taken a second-hand importance than men's official work. That's what I understand. But however, there'll be different cases.
We're really running out of time, and there's a huge buzz of questions here, further questions. I think I can only just ask them on behalf of the people who've sent them to me, and perhaps one more from Ritu, who turns out to be the mysterious 247C63EO, Ritu Agarwal. Now, the two questions that have been, in fact, there are three in the chat box at least, but one is simply the very simple question, yes or no, from the participants. Has COVID reinforced gender stereotypes or altered them in important ways? That was from Professor Mahanti. And a specific question for Yiping, that from Rija, has what has been the impact of the recent civil code on the situation for COVID, gender and COVID in China? I think they're the only two questions we can take before we wake up.
I can take Professor Mohanty's question.
Sure.
Yes, someone.
Patricia, I can take very briefly that Professor Mohanty's question about agency. No, what was the question? Have the altered? Can I see the
reinforced gender stereotypes?
Yeah, gender stereotypes. Now there are the indicators is very strong in this kind of thing, that it has not altered, but it may not apply the kind of uniform situation. One is that it has not really altered in the sense of that why the domestic violence has increased. And that means that domestic violence has increased. That shows that stereotypes have really increased and not decreased by any means. But among younger people, you also find, and some in urban areas, kind of 1% or not even 1%, 1 in 1,000 case you find where the man would start doing a little bit of housework. South Asia in particular is known. The ILO comes out with very good data that men spend only less than half an hour, 29 minutes in doing the homework and women in housework and care, unpaid care, and women do 4 hours of work. So you can see the difference. This is the 2018 data. COVID all of a sudden cannot change. So this would be very, very important in terms of how the housework and care is really imposed on one gender. And if it is not done properly, if it's not done adequately, then the punishment and all that is stereotyping goes on. Whether you are a professor, whether you are an academic or IT worker, but the housework either through housekeeper or maid or through you is your responsibility. That stereotype continues, and this needs to be changed. And second thing is need to be changed. Husband allowing, husband permitting. I mean, this kind of language. Who is permitting for whom? Because if we are talking of gender equality, there has to be a fundamental change in our language, both for women and men. Thank you.
Okay, I think Yiping, would you just like to comment on recent changes in the civil code?
Okay, this is not the change. It's the first time that China make this civil code, so it's very, very crucial one. But this is a long process. There's some, debate. There's also consultation, which civil societies, academic all participate. However, I think that this code will not satisfy everyone. I think for example, the case that I present is on the controversial, the clause on the, whether it should be a 1 month, period before it can officially divorce. So this is one of the issue, because the criticize on this clause is that, many of the domestic violence or the violence in intimate partner violence happen during this time, and it can be, life-threatening for those, victims. So this code is not taken in consideration of this situation, which of course the majority of the potential victims would be women. So this is a one criticism. But this doesn't mean that the civil societies or the feminist activists did not actively engage in this process. I think they will continue to engage, but make sure that the implementation of this, this law and also will be the gender, gender responsive and gender equality concern. I just want to add one more thing to this, the previous question regarding the man's eager to go back to work as a normal work. I would doubt whether they want to go to work or they want to get rid of this house chore. This is my suspicion. However, there's a research, I have read an article about academic journal did receive less articles, contribution from the women academic, and they receive more. So this is a kind of gender imbalance already happened because the women could not concentrate on their research as before. And on the other, I agree with Professor, because this depends on the type of job. For example, if you're a nurse, you're a doctor, you're a women doctor, you're a nurse, you have to go to work every day, but I think this COVID also actually challenged us to rethink about the future of work, the modality of working, and also, what kind of job. I think there's in China, for example, when the restaurants closed down, but the delivery actually booming. There was a lot of delivery people. However, who can do that kind of job? Women were excluded from that kind of potential, that's a new booming job opportunity. So this is something that we should consider when the policymakers make a policy regarding to the measures to take in to address the issue of COVID. The same as like a previous question regarding domestic work. Yes, domestic work has not been recognized fully by policy, by law, by our statistics and calculation in the economy. However, the policy can't address the the care work, the care burden of women. For example, China now now there's a discussion about whether governments should subsidize the like 0 to 3 years old child care. That's something I think related to this. I think as a COVID actually make this discussion more relevant and more urgent. That's all.
I can see many more questions, many more fingers up, hands up, but I think that we do have to conclude here, which is a great pity, but it's been an extremely rich discussion. It's unearthed many more problems than we were anticipating at the beginning. The question has been asked and answered in several ways. Has this COVID changed stereotypes? Will it reinforce stereotypes? I think someone here has, Usha, to everyone, has mentioned what we have been saying privately to ourselves, that many women leaders have handled the COVID question at the national level much better than the men. And we have some very good examples there in New Zealand, Germany, and also in Scandinavia. So the other questions have also come up about the stereotyping of work, of the intersectionality of class and gender. That was one of the things brought up about the maids and the different views on whether how the maids, the work of the maids and the agency of the housewife versus the husband. I think that this is, we have unearthed a great many problems and issues that really need separate address here. The discussion's gone on to subjects one was never anticipating. And I think that we are in the process of rewriting the language of discussion of this particular social issue. My apologies to those who raised their hands and haven't been heard. Also, that we have to terminate now. This is, we're all halfway through what we'd like to say. Many people haven't been able to speak at all. But I think that what we have learned from this is that asking the gender question in any subject is something that is really worthwhile. And there's no, one never knows where it will lead. I think the hypermasculinity of the gender role, or the Chinese nurses changing sex in order to be COVID warriors, is really opening things, questions of culture and understanding that we never anticipated. So putting all this together, and again, I might emphasize that the India-China comparative aspect is always richer than one expected. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to those who enabled it. And let us now, ladies, many of us, depart to serve tea to the stay-at-home.
Sometimes men also serve tea.
And also find out where their newspaper was, if I may say. So thank you very much.
Thank you.